I can't take it anymore. Rubbing my aching back, I mustered the courage to speak up to Carter. I really was at my wit's end, and I thought that if I kept taking care of the child and doing household chores on my own any longer, I'd break down. However, Carter neither comforted me nor showed any compassion. Instead, he glared at me and said, "What? Don't you dare slack off on taking care of the kid and the chores. If you're gonna whine, I'll divorce you and kick you out." Seeing Carter shout those words in disdain, my world went dark. There's no love left in him for me. If things don't go his way, he considers me expendable, I guess. Holding back the anger boiling up from deep within, I felt something inside of me withdrawing. I can't stand being with this man any longer. I stared at Carter intently, making a pivotal decision. My name is Catherine Sawyer, 41 years old. I live with my husband Carter and our 5-year-old daughter, Evelyn. Originally, I used to work as a temporary staff, hopping from one company to another. But after marrying Carter, I became a full-time housewife. Being a temporary staff without any special skills and having never married, I was anxious about my future. So, I had no complaints about settling down as a housewife after marriage. I've always enjoyed housework, so transitioning into a household role was easy for me. Carter and I got married 5 years ago. It was a late marriage for both of us, but we were blessed with a daughter shortly after. Carter, a public servant, seemed like the perfect match for me. We first met at a local bar we both frequented. My workplace was near the city hall, and Carter and I had bumped into each other at the bar a few times. At first, I just thought, oh, it's that guy again. But after a few encounters, Carter started the conversation. We often drank alone, so perhaps we felt some sort of connection. Carter, who worked in the public sector, was handsome and charismatic. It was surprising he hadn't married yet. When he proposed dating, I immediately said yes. I was actually worried that I might not meet someone else in the future. Most good men my age were already married, and I didn't have the courage to approach younger men. That's when I met Carter, and I quickly fell in love. Carter moved with grace and had a mysterious charm about him, making me think he must have been popular with the ladies in the past. "I'll definitely make you happy." "Yeah, sure." When Carter proposed to me after dating for 6 months, I immediately said yes. I had no doubt that this was the peak of our happiness. I wanted us to be that couple everyone would envy once we were married. Such dreams made me look forward to my life with Carter. I found out I was pregnant with our daughter about a month after our wedding. I quickly shared the news with Carter. I thought Carter would be pleased, but he seemed a bit down. "What's wrong? Aren't you happy?" "I mean, I am, but I'm just not good with kids." Carter looked apologetic as he confessed, but I thought, "Is that all?" and felt relieved. There are plenty of folks out there who aren't naturally good with kids, but that doesn't mean they can't become good parents. "It'll be okay. Our child will definitely be adorable." "I hope so. I might just leave most of the parenting to you." "It's okay. I love kids, so we'll figure it out." Back then, I didn't think too deeply about Carter's words. Even if one isn't fond of kids, surely seeing their own child would make them fall in love. So, all I wanted then was to reassure Carter. A few months later, our daughter Evelyn was born safely. There were concerns because of my age, but I was relieved when everything went smoothly. Carter didn't attend the birth, so his first meeting with Evelyn was the day after. "Look how tiny and cute her hands and feet are." "Yeah, they are." Contrary to my expectations, Carter didn't seem too excited looking at newborn Evelyn. Perhaps he didn't find newborns cute? I've heard that paternal instincts can sometimes kick in slower than maternal ones. I was understanding at the time, but even after we returned home from the hospital, Carter's demeanor didn't change. Even after seeing me exhausted from the challenges of new motherhood, Carter just went about his work routine. I didn't expect him to get up in the middle of the night for feedings, but a little sympathy would have been nice. About a month after giving birth, after we had Evelyn's christening, I decided to express my feelings to Carter. "Hey, Do you think you could help a bit with the baby or housework? Even just on your days off. If you can, maybe I could get a bit of rest. Carter listened to my argument and his face hardened. I braced myself, wondering if I had said something to upset him. That's tough. Why? When Evelyn was born, I think I told you, I'm not good with kids. Plus, I can't do any household chores. It's all right, isn't it? I work as a public servant and bring in the money. Housework and childcare, that's the least of my worries. Got it? His tone was matter of fact, but there wasn't a trace of kindness in Carter's words. The way he talked about bringing in the money sounded condescending, as if he looked down on stay-at-home moms. I was shocked. Carter had never treated me with such disdain before. For the first time, I felt deeply hurt by Carter's true feelings. But I think parenting is a job for both of us. Even when I timidly objected, Carter just shook his head. I can't do parenting. Just like I said at first. But you were okay with it, Catherine. I left childcare to you. Even though he wasn't angry or upset, Carter's words were cold, casting a dark shadow over my heart. Feeling abandoned by my husband, I looked at our sleeping child in my arms. Sure, kids are adorable, but when they cry intensely, it's mentally draining. All I wanted was for Carter to help out just a little. And yet, he dumped everything on me. Seeing my downcast mood, Carter left for work without a word. Before we got married, I used to wonder why such a great guy hadn't been married yet. Sure, Carter had a lot of charm as a man. But that was just as a romantic partner. When it came to family life, he turned out to be the kind of man you can't call great at all. It was my fault for not realizing this before marriage. Regretting it now won't help, especially when I have a newborn to care for. I can't just be left out on the streets. With unstoppable tears of frustration, I wondered what the future held for us. True to his word, Carter left all the household and child-rearing tasks to me and did nothing outside of his job. Even now, 5 years into our marriage, all he does is order me around, saying things like, "When's dinner? Clean this up for me." And he has become more authoritative than when we first got married. Sighing, I just followed Carter's instructions. Our daughter, now 4 years old, still requires a lot of attention. Even though I put her in preschool, I was too busy with household chores during those hours, with no time to take a break. But to Carter, it seemed like I, not working, was indulging by leaving Evelyn at daycare, and his demands on me grew stronger day by day. Then, one day happened. We had planned to go watch the sports day at Evelyn's kindergarten together, but on the day, Carter said, "I can't make it after all." Why not? I was called to work suddenly. So, sorry, you'll have to go on your own. Really? Working on a Sunday, even though he's a public servant? I couldn't help but wonder, but there wasn't much I could do about it. I went to the sports day all by myself. From that day on, Carter often started to leave the house saying, "I'm swamped." Since he started staying out even on weekends, I decided to visit my parents' home after a long time. I was tired of keeping Evelyn company all by myself, and I thought Evelyn might want to see her grandparents. Once home, I discussed the situation with my mother. We've always been close and could talk about anything. As soon as I saw my mother's face, I just started to spill. Carter doesn't help with any chores or with Evelyn. And recently, he's gone somewhere on his days off. He doesn't come back all day. It's hard on Evelyn. Really? Do you think it's okay? It's not okay. I wish he'd be more responsible. But since he's the one working, I can't really talk back. Not that. I was wondering if Carter might be having an affair. An affair? I initially denied my mother's suggestion of Carter cheating. But when I thought about it, I had no way of knowing what he was really doing when he wasn't at home. I hate to bring this up. Maybe keep an eye out and see? Yeah, I will. 2 days later, on Monday, Evelyn and I left my parents' place and returned home. I had let Carter know we were visiting my parents, so he was probably already at work. We arrived home just before noon. When I opened the door, a smoky smell hit my nose.
Mom, it stinks.
What's this smell? Could it be cigarettes? That familiar tobacco smell I occasionally catch in the city was somehow filling my house. Didn't have to think twice, it was Carter. But Carter never smoked in front of me before. It had been that way since we first met. Could it be that he'd been smoking outside all this time? It's the only explanation. I opened all the windows in the house to air it out. Then, when I went to the bedroom, to my surprise, tissues were scattered everywhere, and there were a bunch of liquor bottles and cans. On top of that, I could faintly smell perfume. The word affair that my mother mentioned started to cross my mind. Could he really be cheating? But why would he leave the room in such a mess? It's as if he's practically asking me to suspect him. Carter must have brought another woman into our home while I was away. The work he mentioned was just a lie. He couldn't even clean up properly to cover up his tracks. Knowing this, my frustration grew. I was lost in thought, sitting on the living room couch, when Evelyn's words about being hungry snapped me back to reality. Right, I can't stay like this. I have to find out if he's really cheating. While preparing lunch, I planned my next move. After lunch, I immediately hired a private investigator to check on Carter. It was costly, but if they could confirm his infidelity, it'd be worth it. 2 weeks later, the PI contacted me. The verdict was damning. Apparently, Carter had been seeing a young woman who worked at a bar near the place we first met. She was 20 years younger than him. Given Carter's charm, it wasn't surprising that even a younger woman could fall for him. I had once too. But I never thought Carter could be such a lowlife. Holding the evidence from the investigator, I filled out the divorce papers without hesitation. Staying with Carter would only bring pain to both Evelyn and me. It's heartbreaking for Evelyn, but I have to step up for her sake. Having prepared for divorce, I was waiting for the right moment to bring it up with Carter. However, for some reason, Carter didn't show any signs of infidelity for a while. In the meantime, I got busy with parent-teacher meetings and school events for preschool, and found it harder to keep up with the household chores. One day, when I served dinner using store-bought sides, Carter suddenly got angry.
What's this? Can't you make a proper dinner?
He slammed his fork on the table, shouting with a clearly annoyed face. Evelyn, who was eating with us, jumped in surprise. I'm sorry. But lately, I've been so busy. My back's been hurting too. Can't you help out just a little? I asked, hoping against hope, but Carter just glared at me.
I can't take this anymore.
Rubbing my aching back, I mustered the courage to speak up to Carter. I really was at my wit's end, and I thought that if I kept taking care of the child and doing household chores on my own any longer, I'd break down. However, Carter neither comforted me nor showed any compassion. Instead, he glared at me and said,
What? Don't you dare slack off on taking care of the kid and the chores. If you're gonna whine, I'll divorce you and kick you out.
Seeing Carter shout those words in disdain, my world went dark. There's no love left in him for me. If things don't go his way, he considers me expendable, I guess. Holding back the anger boiling up from deep within, I felt something inside of me withdrawing. I can't stand being with this man any longer. I stared at Carter intently, making a pivotal decision.
I understand.
I swiftly rose from the chair and told him.
I'm getting a divorce and leaving.
Staring at me, Carter gulped, but quickly recovered his demeanor and snorted.
As you wish.
He spat out and stretched as if feeling liberated. I stared coldly at Carter. I hastily packed my essentials into a carry-on bag, setting dinner aside. Anticipating something like this, I had already sent both Evelyn's and my clothes to my parents' house. So, I was able to prepare in no time.
Evelyn, we're leaving.
Without a word, Evelyn stood up and followed me. I truly felt sorry for her, but staying with Carter wasn't good for her upbringing. With a heavy heart, I took Evelyn by the hand.
Hey, are you serious? It's on you, whatever happens. You ain't even working, so what's your plan?
I left the house without answering Carter's question. As I was about to close the front door, I thought I heard him click his tongue, but I ignored it. He's probably going to live with that woman he is having an affair with. He might even be relieved that I brought up the breakup. Though it pained me to think I was playing into Carter's hands, it couldn't be helped.
Evelyn, wanna go to Grandma's?
Yeah. It seemed like Evelyn, despite being a child, grasped the situation. She had grown to be so independent. Thankfully, she wasn't much influenced by Carter, who never took part in parenting. I returned to my parents' house with Evelyn. My parents welcomed us warmly. My father was furious at Carter, but he calmed down when I intervened.
I just can't stand that guy. Got any plans?
Yeah. I'm gonna file the divorce tomorrow and consult a lawyer. Knowing that I was going to take the appropriate measures to discipline them, my parents seemed relieved. Evelyn was playing happily with her grandparents, probably glad she could visit them. The next day, after I filed for divorce, I finally felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. Now, Carter and I are nothing more than strangers. All I want now is the child support from him. It was 3 days after I left the house when I got a call from Carter. At first, I thought it'd be a hassle and ignored it, but he kept calling every few minutes. Finally, annoyed, I decided to settle things and answer. Hello?
Catherine, where the hell are you? Hurry up and make my dinner.
Out of the blue, he's yelling about dinner? What's he talking about? I calmly said to Carter. You know we're divorced, right?
Why would I make dinner for my ex-husband? What? Divorced? I don't accept that. Just get back home now. You're probably at your folks' place, aren't ya?
Sure, I'm at my folks', but there's no way I'm thinking of going back to the house with Carter. After all, since we're divorced, it's not my home anymore.
Listen, Carter, did you hear what I said? Our divorce is official. Whether you accept it or not, it doesn't matter. What?
It seemed like it finally sunk in for Carter as he muttered, divorce. Official.
That's right. So, now you and I are just strangers. There's no reason for me to cook for you. But this is problematic. I can't eat anything but the meals you make. I can't stomach eating out or convenience store food.
That's true. Carter always preferred home-cooked meals and never ate takeout or convenience store food. But that doesn't mean a divorced wife should make him food.
You should ask that woman you've been seeing to make you dinner.
When I brought up his affair, Carter gasped in surprise. He probably didn't realize I knew about it.
How did you find out about that? I had a hunch for a while and hired a private investigator. She works at a bar, right? Only 25, I heard. Her name's Ashley Thompson. Maybe if she cooks for you, everything will be solved.
Hearing the woman's name from me, Carter was shocked and at a loss for words. I pressed on further.
I've been noticing you're out of the house a lot recently, but I never imagined you'd be cheating. Were you out with another woman even on Evelyn's sports day? It's just disgusting. Why should I cook for someone like you?
Considering Carter and I are already divorced, I was on the offensive. Carter, seemingly caught off guard, hesitated on the other end of the line.
Well, if you already knew, that makes things simpler. Please, Catherine, Ashley can't cook. At this rate, I feel like I'm gonna starve. Don't you think Evelyn would miss not having her father around?
It was low of him to bring up Evelyn's name. I did feel somewhat guilty for taking her father away from her. As I struggled for a response, Evelyn unexpectedly approached me while I was on the phone. Go over there for a moment, I whispered, but Evelyn innocently asked, Daddy? He must have heard her, as he exclaimed loudly, Yes, it's Daddy. You miss living with me, don't you? I closely watched Evelyn's reaction. Evelyn pondered, tilting her head, and then simply said, Nope. For Evelyn, as long as I have Mom, Grandma, and Grandpa, I'm happy, she replied cheerfully.
But hey, Only Daddy can play those lift-up games with you, and you'd want to go out together, right?
I'm okay if I have Mom. I love Mom way more. No. Hearing Evelyn's honest feelings seemed to crush Carter. It's only natural to feel that way, considering Evelyn's feelings. Carter had barely been involved in parenting. It's only natural for Evelyn to feel she doesn't need a father like that. Hearing Evelyn's words almost brought tears to my eyes.
That's how it is, so we're officially parting ways. Expect a call from my lawyer regarding child support. Oh, and do let Ashley know she'd better be watching her back as well.
Child support? Why do I have to?
Isn't it obvious? Do you even realize what you've done? Cheating while having a family. You were prepared for the consequences, weren't you?
It's just, with Ashley.
I didn't even want to hear the rest. Cheating without even realizing the consequences.
I can't. Ashley's pregnant. I don't have that kind of money. I'll need to support the coming baby too. Please, just forgive me.
Pregnant? What a clueless man. I listened in disbelief to Carter's words. Yeah, that must be tough. Planning on pushing the responsibility of the child you're bringing into the world onto your partner, huh? But it doesn't matter. You are going to pay child support. With a commanding tone, I said that and hung up before I could hear Carter's response. The phone rang again immediately, but I wasn't in the mood to pick it up anymore. From now on, my lawyer will handle it and will probably get in touch with Carter. I dropped the phone and took a deep breath. Evelyn was looking at me with a big smile. She was holding a stuffed puppy that my mother had bought her.
Mommy, wanna play with me?
What should we play?
Let's play house.
All right. Let's go over there.
Okay.
Holding her stuffed puppy, Evelyn ran off to the living room where my mother and my father were. I want to protect Evelyn's smile for the rest of my life. After all, I'm the only parent she has. Later on, it seems my lawyer settled things with Carter, and I'll be receiving child support monthly. It turns out Carter doesn't have any savings and likely borrowed from his parents. His parents called me and kept apologizing. It was sad to think that such decent parents had a son like that. Apparently, Carter sold our shared house, but most of the money went towards paying off loans. Having lost his place, Carter, of course, moved back with his parents. It seems they've made Carter handle all the household chores. I bet he's struggling now with both housework and his job. The woman he cheated with has rethought the idea of marrying someone with debts and plans to have a child without getting married. She must be financially strained as well. But I don't feel sorry for her. It's the price they pay for their actions. I did hope, as a fellow mother, that she'd give birth to a healthy child. I've been staying with my parents and job hunting. I was a bit excited about working again after a long time. Of course, it will be tough, but I was prepared for it. I'm not like Carter. I have a sense of responsibility to raise Evelyn properly. I felt I could overcome any hardship for Evelyn's smile. Mommy, thank you always. Evelyn hugged me before bedtime. She seemed to understand that I was trying hard. I hugged Evelyn back and whispered, "Thank you for coming into my life. We're gonna build a house for 2 families." Wait, what? Where's the money for that? Huh? Obviously, it's gonna come from your savings. I was taken aback when my husband suddenly informed me that we'd be living with his parents. Now I understood why he'd been so dismissive. Trying to hide my shock, he continued. "If you really hate the idea, we can just get divorced."
Fine. I'll divorce you.
I couldn't stand him having his way any longer. Besides, there's no way I'd divorce him for free. He's gonna pay for this. And just as he wanted, we're gonna get divorced.
What the heck did you do? Who knows? Maybe it's just your past catching up to you.
My husband would soon regret his actions, crying over them. And he'd end up losing everything. My name's Catherine, and I'm currently a homemaker. I met my husband, Bob, through my previous job.
More accurately, he was introduced to me by my boss at the time. This boss happened to be a college senior of mine, and we've been close since our university days. Got some time today?
Yes, I do, but what?
Actually, I've got someone I want to introduce you to.
Someone you want to introduce?
Even if he was my boss, I found it a bit bothersome. I wanted to go home early and watch a recorded show. But I couldn't simply turn down an invitation from my boss. Well, he's a good guy, don't worry.
Just for a bit, okay?
Though my first impression of Bob wasn't the best, as we talked, we found we had similar interests. Plus, it was nice not having to be on guard around him. Things progressed quite quickly after that. Will you marry me?
You're proposing already?
Huh? Sorry. I was just taken aback.
So, what's your answer?
Bob proposed to me only 3 months into our relationship. Though I was so surprised I made a snarky comment, of course, my answer was a yes. But once we're married, I'd like you to be a homemaker, okay?
Sure. That sounds good.
I accepted Bob's proposal. I always had the idea of being a homemaker, and I wanted to fulfill Bob's wishes as much as I could. Being a homemaker turned out to be quite a challenge for me every day. You seem tired.
Being a homemaker turned out to be quite a challenge for me every day.
What do you mean?
I thought I'd have more free time.
Bob just laughed.
You'll get used to it eventually. I'll help out till then.
Thank you. That really helps. Honestly, I was grateful for his suggestion. Cleaning, laundry, and other chores weren't my forte, so it always took me a while. Bob never complained about my lack of skill. There were moments when I felt truly grateful to have married him. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. It didn't work out again.
You tried so hard, too. But there'll be a next time.
Suddenly, Bob's face changed and he raised his voice.
What do you know, Catherine?
I thought he brought it up, but I held my tongue. Bob works in sales, but apparently he hasn't been doing well. At that time, I never imagined things would turn out this way.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean it that way.
My bad. I shouldn't have reacted like that. Even though he apologized, I could see the frustration on his face. In situations like this, I try to think of the right words to say, but I just can't find them. I worried that if I said something else now, it might further upset my husband. Then one day. How was work?
Well, I wasn't feeling well, so I took the day off.
Oh, okay. Although he said he was feeling sick, he didn't seem to be. He ate his breakfast as usual, and even had seconds when it came to the bread. I had my doubts but didn't think much of it at the time. From that day on, whenever I said something to Bob, he took it as a complaint and got upset. How are you feeling now?
Yeah. I'm feeling better. I'm gonna take a short walk.
Huh? You haven't rested yet.
It's okay. I won't go far.
But Bob's expression changed. I sensed trouble, but it was too late. What now? Got something else to complain about? It's not like that.
Then just leave it, okay? Instead of fussing over me, focus on the house.
Okay. I felt even more deflated. People say marriage can change a person, but with Bob, it was like he became someone else entirely. Life went on like this, and years passed. Lately, all I thought about was how not to upset Bob. I'll be home late tonight.
Got it. What about dinner?
I plan on eating when I get home. That day, I waited and waited for my husband to come home. The clock struck 11 p.m., and he was still not back. I'm home. It was just about to turn midnight. Relieved he was finally back, I greeted him with a smile. Welcome back. There's dinner if you want. Nah, I already ate out. Huh? What?
Well, you said you'd eat at home today.
Oh, did I? Must have slipped my mind. I stood frozen at the entrance. I had prepared dinner and waited without eating, just for him. Without a single apology from Bob, my distrust grew. Am I really loved? Then, one day after such days passed.
Here you go.
Bob came home holding a bouquet of flowers. They were red roses, my favorite. What's the occasion?
What are you talking about? It's Catherine's birthday, isn't it?
Oh. With everything going on lately, I had completely forgotten about my own birthday.
I got wine and cake too. Let's celebrate.
Yes. I didn't expect a surprise, but I was genuinely delighted. That's when I truly felt loved by Bob. We enjoyed a peaceful atmosphere that day, something we hadn't felt in a long time. I wished those moments would last forever, but they didn't.
About next month's payments.
Huh? Next month? Our happy times ended abruptly. I received money for monthly expenses, but it had noticeably decreased from the beginning. Until now, I had managed by cutting corners, but this time was different. I had my own savings, but I wanted to keep them for retirement.
The money you've been giving me isn't enough.
What?
It should be more than sufficient.
Have you been wasting it on something, Catherine?
I haven't.
I've been saving where I can.
You sure you're not just buying things you want?
Normally, I might have backed down at this point, but not this time. I wanted children, and considering our future, I believed we needed a serious discussion. I haven't been spending recklessly. It's been tough for months, especially since the amount you give has decreased.
You're blaming me?
Then where's the rest of the money going? Determined to stand my ground, I said my piece. But Bob, perhaps annoyed by my words, threw his smartphone at me. I instinctively shielded my face. It didn't hit me, but the phone's screen shattered.
If you're gonna complain so much, why don't you figure it out? That's why I'm talking to you about it.
Another factor exacerbating the issue was Bob's low salary. In his sales job at the company, a significant portion of his pay was incentive-based. The more contracts he secured, the more he earned. But if he couldn't secure contracts, his salary wouldn't increase. Given what he said, I decided to make a suggestion.
Fine. I'll get a part-time job and bring in some money.
That should solve it, right? But Bob didn't approve.
What are you talking about? Didn't you promise to be a homemaker when we got married? But it's getting tough to get by, you know? Even so, it's not okay. You're just gonna neglect household chores, right? I'm not talking about working full-time, though.
Feeling that if we didn't resolve this now, it would continue forever, I pressed on. I believed our discussion would ultimately benefit both of us. However, what Bob said next was beyond belief.
You wanting to work so much is suspicious. What? How do you figure that? I'm just thinking about our finances.
Seeing the conversation take a strange turn, I tried to steer it back, but Bob wasn't listening.
Catherine, do you have another man or something?
I felt like the trust we'd built over the years was crumbling. After always trying to keep the peace and accommodate Bob's moods, this was the last straw.
Fine. I won't work. You're happy now, right?
You should have said so sooner. By this time, my love for Bob had almost faded. He'd throw tantrums when things didn't go his way. Such a dominant attitude was too much. And then, after a certain incident, I decided to seek revenge.
Just make sure to handle the payments somehow.
I can't do much if I'm not working.
I get it. But Catherine, you should be more grateful to me.
There was a reason Bob was so insistent on me staying home. He wanted to feel like he was providing for the family. However, his ability to be the breadwinner was questionable at best, and he didn't even seem to understand that.
Of course, I am grateful. No, you look down on me, don't you?
Why would you think that?
We can live because of your earnings.
See?
You do get it. Just be more careful from now on.
What I said to Bob wasn't a lie, but dealing with his petty pride was exhausting for me. Honestly, such things seemed so trivial. I started to think that maybe Bob's work troubles were because of his attitude. And then, another problem surfaced.
I heard from Bob that you've been getting a bit too confident lately.
Excuse me? I was invited over by my in-laws, and the moment I stepped inside, I was confronted with this. If Bob hadn't said anything, it wouldn't have come to this. Moreover, they've always doted on their only son, Bob. So, whatever Bob did, they approved.
Who do you think is earning for you? You should be more grateful.
Seriously. I responded half-heartedly, finding the situation bothersome. That only added fuel to the fire with my in-laws.
What kind of response is that? Are you looking down on us? Honey, say something. Well, a wife should always listen to her husband, right? Why don't you teach her, dear?
That's a good idea. This was getting beyond tedious. Being involved with these two could throw one's life into chaos. I had thought they were kind people before the marriage, but I guess they just needed a trigger. Thanks to Bob tattling on me, it triggered them.
I apologize, but I have plans after this, so I'll be heading out.
I wanted to get out of there as fast as I could.
Oh, come on. You've got plenty of time, right? You're just a homemaker after all.
My in-laws gave me a nasty smile.
No, I really don't have time today, so excuse me.
With that, I made a hasty exit from their house. All the way home, my heart was racing. I had never felt this kind of emotion, almost like fear, before. But it wasn't over.
Welcome back.
Upon returning home, Bob was waiting at the door.
Why are you waiting out here?
You went to my parents' house, didn't you?
Yeah, but I just got a call from my mom.
She said you left in a hurry. I realized I had messed up. I had completely forgotten that Bob might contact my in-laws.
It's not like I ran away.
Then what's it about?
I just had a place to go, that's all.
I felt my excuse was a bit weak, but it seemed Bob didn't press the matter further. I sighed in relief, looking up at the ceiling. After that, Bob's domineering attitude lessened, and I enjoyed a momentary peace.
I feel like I have a fever, so I'm gonna take the day off again.
How high is it?
Maybe 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit?
All right, I'll get you some medicine. Thanks. He had been regularly going to work recently, but I was concerned that he was taking time off again. I finished my chores for the day and went to check on Bob, who was supposedly resting. When I reached out to empty the trash, I noticed something. There were discarded pills. He was pretending to take them and then throwing them away. I instinctively felt Bob was faking his illness. And then I remembered something. In times like this, he often said he was going for a walk and would leave the house. That's when I decided to set a trap for Bob.
I'm going to run some errands and might be back a bit late.
Okay. His reply didn't sound like someone who's sick. There was a noticeable energy in his voice. I pretended to leave, but waited in a spot where I could see the front door. Sure enough, about 15 minutes later, I saw Bob leaving the house. Where's he off to? I discreetly followed him and saw him enter a casino nearby. I quickly took out my phone and snapped a photo. It became clear to me that his frequent outings were all because of this. It's no wonder that the money he hands over every month for our expenses has been decreasing. And then, on a certain Saturday, Bob made a shocking statement. This became the catalyst for the upcoming incident.
We're gonna build a house for 2 families.
Wait, what?
Where's the money for that?
Huh? Obviously, it's gonna come from your savings. I was left speechless, being suddenly told about moving in with my in-laws. The reason he'd been increasingly disrespectful to me lately became clear. Bob continued, sensing my shock.
I'm the head of this household.
So, whatever I decide, you gotta follow.
Is that so?
What on earth is he talking about? The fact that he'd say such things as if they were totally normal, he's not impressive or anything of the sort. If you're not on board with it, we can just get a divorce.
Fine. Let's divorce.
I couldn't stand being manipulated by Bob any longer. And I wouldn't let him off the hook with just a divorce. Bob needs to be punished. Oh, and by the way, my parents are coming over soon.
What?
Right now? They'll be staying here until the house is built. Make sure you treat them well. With that, Bob hastily began preparing to leave. I couldn't believe how selfish he was being to leave at a time like this, but I saw it as a golden opportunity. I wanted to leave right away, but I thought it'd be satisfying to tell my in-laws about the divorce in person. I'll handle it. I saw off my husband leaving home and couldn't help but laugh. As I eagerly awaited the arrival of my in-laws, they were like, "Oh? Where's Bob? He left a bit ago. He told me to look after you too. Could you help me with the bags?" "Sure." In the end, I found myself hauling each and every bag into the room, just as directed. While carrying the bags, a question pops into my mind. Why did we decide to live in this house before building a multi-generational home? My in-laws' house is much bigger, and they've been living there for years, so there really wasn't any need for us to move in together.
How much time are you gonna take?
Honestly, thinking about our future living together, this isn't a great start. Once I finished tidying up and thought of taking a short break, my in-laws didn't allow me even that. Fetch this, by that, they treated me like some sort of housemaid. I decided it was about time and broke the news to my in-laws. Bob asked me for a divorce earlier, so I'm getting divorced.
What?
Catherine, what are you saying out of the blue? That's right. You are here to work for us. I've already made up my mind. I quickly packed my things and prepared to leave. My in-laws' faces were obviously shocked. If you do that, you don't know what will happen. Oh, Bob won't keep quiet either. I was the one told by Bob himself that if I didn't like it, we should get divorced. There's nothing wrong with it. How dare you, being just the wife? The resentment from my in-laws was palpable, but I wasn't scared or anything. By the way, thinking Bob can support both of you, I don't think it's feasible. What do you mean by that? Why don't you ask him directly? They seemed to be screaming about something afterward, but I ignored them and left. I thought of returning home, but given the distance, I decided to check into a nearby hotel. Then, I made a call.
Sorry to disturb your day off.
I have something to discuss. Hey, long time no see. What's up?
It's about Bob.
I told the boss everything about his actions up to now. I see. So that's what it was about.
Did you notice anything unusual?
Well, I've had my suspicions about him for a while now. According to the boss, Bob had been on the company's radar. Well, with the way he's been behaving, it's no surprise.
Also, I have photos of Bob lying and going to the casino. I'll send them to you later.
That would help. But are you sure about this? Yes. I'm planning on divorcing Bob. I can't take it any longer. I see. With all he's done, he probably won't last long at this company anyway. I left everything in the hands of the boss and enjoyed some time to myself. During this time, my phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from Bob, so I turned it off. It was Saturday, he was gonna be in for a surprise when he'd work on Monday. I wish I could see Bob's face. Then Monday came. What did you do? I turned on my phone to find over 100 missed calls from Bob. Excitedly, I answered. So he sounded pretty panicked. Who knows? It's just comeuppance for everything you've done so far. I responded that way to Bob. Then, Bob became furious. Well, I saw this coming. I got told I'm fired when I went to the company. It must be something you did. I let out a deep sigh. Even if I hadn't intervened, he probably would have been fired at some point. I just expedited the process. So, the company knew about everything you've been up to, didn't they? That's not possible. I made sure it was hidden well. Bob seemed really flustered. Well, whatever happens to you is none of my business. Huh? You think I'm gonna be the one in trouble if you get fired? Bob seems to have forgotten what he said. My in-laws must have told him. Why would I be bothered? We're getting a divorce, after all. Bob went silent, seemingly stunned. Did he actually think I wouldn't go through with the divorce? If so, he's truly a clueless man. I'm utterly dumbfounded. You're serious about that?
Of course. Who'd want to be with someone who jokes about such a thing?
It was just a slip of the tongue.
And why would anyone want to live with your parents who are drowning in debt?
What are you talking about? Apparently, my in-laws hadn't told him. I used my weekend to gather information about my in-laws. I just had to know the real reason they wanted to live with us. Fortunately, my in-laws' house was just a 15-minute train ride away, so I decided to pay them a visit. The reason my in-laws agreed to move in with us in the first place was that they no longer had a home to live in. I did my homework, Bob. Even talked to the neighbors. Who'd have thought that gambling would lead them to lose their house? They're both losers. It's crazy, but both of my in-laws had gambling addictions. They poured money into things like casino and racked up debts, even using their house as collateral. They had to sell it in the end. Them coming to our place was just a temporary solution until their new house was built. You. What about you? Faking illness to go gambling? You knew about that? Well, even if you hid it, it doesn't matter now. I've got pictures, just so you know.
You're meddling too much. Where are you now?
You think I'm gonna tell you? Bob seemed too emotional, almost irrational. I thought this would be a good time to speak my mind.
Spit it out already!
Instead of that, why not tell your parents the truth? What truth are you talking about? About your salary. What if they knew you're only making $3,500? Basically admitting you're incompetent. I must admit, I'm proud of myself for holding up this long. And to top it off, Bob was using that money he earned on gambling. You both have secrets, don't you? Maybe it's best to get it all out now.
Shut up! I was gonna tell them eventually.
You don't have to lie, you know. I chuckled, mocking Bob. Looks like the tables have turned. He's probably getting what he deserves for always looking down on me.
After all you've done, you think it won't come back to bite you? Remember, you're just a homemaker. The one who's gonna suffer is you.
I don't know about that. To me, it just sounds like the whining of a sore loser. How did it come to this? Who knows? I'm tired. Later. With that, I hung up. And then headed out to meet a lawyer who assists divorce. Divorcing him was only part of my revenge. Bob and his kind are gonna suffer even more from here on out. Later, I got a divorce. As expected, I received a call from Bob.
I have debts to pay. What am I supposed to do?
Seems like after losing his job, he made the dumb decision to live off of loans. His parents are struggling with debt, and he can't even see that? What a pitiful man. That sounds tough. But you gotta pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I'm cheering for you.
Don't you feel even a bit of responsibility to help your ex-husband? Why would I? We're strangers now. You. If I'd stayed humble, you'd take advantage, wouldn't you? Trying to intimidate me now doesn't make any sense, you know?
I said, laughing, before hanging up. Afterwards, it seems Bob decided to cut ties with his parents. Moreover, his parents weren't aware of Bob's salary situation. Apparently, they had a falling out over it and decided to part ways. Well, either way, a bright future for them doesn't seem likely. On my end. You've had it tough recently, huh? No, thank you for all your help during that time. Well, I wanted to ask, would you consider coming back to work with us? We're short-staffed right now.
I'd be really grateful, are you sure?
Of course. It'd help us out too. And so, I found a job, and my new life is going smoothly. My savings, which my ex-husband was after, are safe. From now on, I want to spend both my money and time for myself.
You call this food for a family gathering?
With just one bite of the dish, Thomas flipped the plate over on the table, his angry voice echoing throughout the room. All the relatives gathered looked at him in shock. I've never seen anyone toss food on the floor before. I'm sure they all felt the same way.
Hey, what's your problem? It's your fault for making such terrible food. You're a stay-at-home wife and you serve this on such an occasion? Who'd eat this crap?
Thomas snickered. I looked at him with pity and retorted.
I didn't make it, you know?
What? Thomas's dumbfounded voice filled the room. Now's my chance. The perfect opportunity. I'm not gonna miss the chance to stand up to him after all he's put me through. I took a deep breath and composed myself. My name is Sarah Mitchell, 32 years old. Up until a year ago, I was employed at a condominium management company, but I resigned upon getting married, so now I'm a full-time housewife. If it weren't for the strong insistence of my husband Thomas, I might have continued working there. But Thomas really wanted me to be a stay-at-home wife. I obliged and listened to Thomas's request, leaving the company. Honestly speaking, I wanted to work a bit more, but considering Thomas's earnings, I figured we could comfortably live without me pushing myself to work. Thomas works at a major consulting firm. Initially, we met through work, and as we were in charge of similar projects and met often, our relationship blossomed from colleagues to a romantic one, ultimately leading to marriage. Right after graduating from college, Thomas, who had been hopping through various consulting firms, was competent and articulate. While working with him, I was impressed by his work ethic and initiated a romantic approach from my side. I never thought someone like him would pay attention to me, an ordinary person in terms of looks and abilities, but I was surprised when he responded to my feelings. I was so happy that, after getting into a relationship with him, I unabashedly gushed about him to my friends. My friends seemed a bit perplexed, but from the bottom of my heart, I believed that this was the pinnacle of happiness. Even when we decided to get married just over a year into our relationship, I was totally walking on air, all giddy and joyous. Little did I know what kind of misfortune was awaiting me.
Listen, I'm busy with work on weekdays, so I'm gonna come home only on weekends.
Sorry, but please be okay with that. On the day that we had our wedding ceremony, he casually mentioned this right after we came back home. I, who thought that a happy married life was about to begin, was utterly shocked by this unignorable statement.
Wait, what does that mean?
That means I'll come home only on weekends.
It helps to maintain the feelings we had when we were dating, right?
But... Do you have a problem with it?
No, I don't.
I was, to be honest, dumbfounded by this sudden proposition. Coming home only on weekends, isn't that what's commonly referred to as a weekend marriage? It's strange to decide such an important thing all by oneself. If he really wanted a weekend marriage, he should have told me before we got married. Why did he suddenly proclaim this on the very day we registered our marriage? Sure, seeing each other less might help maintain some of the excitement. But isn't it a natural desire to want to be with the person you love all the time? My initial enthusiasm for our new marriage was quite dampened, and I was more downhearted than I anticipated. Thomas, seeing me like that, treated me unusually kindly that day, whether it was out of pity or to improve my mood, I'm not sure. That night, we engaged in our first night as a married couple, and I was able to momentarily push the thought of our weekend marriage out of my mind. Perhaps this was a strategic win for Thomas. In hindsight, Thomas's declaration at that time was just the beginning. Indeed, what lay ahead was much more harrowing than a mere weekend marriage, something I couldn't even begin to imagine at that time. 2 months into our marriage, Thomas, true to his prior declaration, only came home on the weekends. I, as a stay-at-home wife, had a desire to serve dinner to my husband who came home tired every day, but my enthusiasm deflated all at once. There were also times when he'd come home on the weekend but would take his meals out. So, Thomas rarely tasted anything I made. For a while, I had been subtly insisting that we abandon this weekend-only marriage lifestyle, but Thomas suppressed my opinion, saying,
"Huh? Even though you're just a housewife, you're opposing what I say?"
As if he was the most important person in the house. Sure, I was a housewife, but that was because Thomas wanted it. Now I realized that Thomas had made me quit my job so he could control our home life exactly as he wished. He steered things so that I had to depend on him financially and couldn't oppose his commands. That must have been Thomas's aim all along. At night, tears of frustration would spill into my bed. Why on earth did it turn out like this? I just wanted to have a happy married life. Lamenting is too late now. I have no choice but to wait patiently until Thomas changes his mind. I felt like I was thrown into a tunnel without an exit, filled with anxiety. When our marital life entered its 3rd month, Thomas rarely came home, even on weekends. This wasn't our agreement. Is there any meaning to being married in a situation where we hardly ever see each other as a couple? Can we talk about our life again, please? I asked this with courage once again on a Friday night. Thomas, perhaps having been out drinking with his colleagues, reeked of alcohol. At the same time, a sweet fragrance, like osmanthus, wafted through. I was taken aback. That couldn't possibly be, right? I've told you over and over. I ain't planning to change now. Even though he was drunk, Thomas, as always, pushed through his point. But this isn't what we promised. You said we would spend at least the weekends together, didn't you? What about now? You're not coming home on weekends either. I never agreed to this from the start. At that, Thomas's face turned beet red. I realized I had soured his mood at a glance. How many times do I have to say it? I ain't budging an inch. Seriously, why do you complain so much? How about you finally get where you stand? Contrary to how he was before we got married, Thomas, who showed no signs of caring for me at all, made me move beyond anger to sadness. Why did Thomas ever marry me? Unable to bear it any longer, I quickly retreated to my own room. When I heard Thomas getting in the shower, I crawled out of my room and sneaked into his. I really didn't want to do something like this, but I can't stand being vulnerable to Thomas any longer. In desperation, I searched through Thomas's room, hoping to find some sort of evidence. Several months passed, and for the most part, Thomas and I were living separately as usual. I stopped saying anything to Thomas, who hardly ever came home. There were things that bothered me more, so I thought I'd just live quietly for now. Then, one day, a call came to my cell phone. It was my mother-in-law. I hadn't seen my mother-in-law since we met for the wedding ceremony. Wondering what she could want, I picked up the phone. Hello? Oh, Sarah? It's me. Hi. Is something the matter? My mother-in-law must have been in a supermarket or something. I could hear noisy voices from the other end of the call. Christmas is coming up. You're gonna come to our place for it, right? All the relatives are gathering, and we want you to come too, Sarah. Oh, for Christmas. Yes, I'll definitely come. But I thought my mother-in-law might know something about Thomas, so I decided to throw a question at her. Have you talked to Thomas recently? Thomas? Oh yes, I've talked to him several times. I've been reaching out a lot since he finally got married, but he said that his married life is going well, isn't it? Oh really? I was puzzled by what my mother-in-law said. Is our married life going well? Is that what Thomas told his mother? Where in our weekend marriage does it look like things are going well? But then it hit me. Thomas has been deliberately lying to his mother, saying our married life is sailing smoothly. My mother-in-law is a worrisome type when it comes to her son, kind-hearted if said nicely, overprotective if said harshly. Although we've only met once, it was clear from our first meeting that she adores her son. I think everything Thomas told you is probably a lie. The truth is, I confided in my mother-in-law, expressing that Thomas had declared from the get-go in our marriage that he'd only come home on weekends, and recently, he hasn't even been showing his face properly even on those days. What are you talking about, Sarah? There's no way Thomas would do that. You, on the other hand, trying to deceive me with lies, who do you think you are? My confession brought out her anger, and she raised her voice from the other end of the phone. I, indeed, sighed heavily. This woman believes nothing but Thomas's words. She never doubts Thomas's lies. If someone speaks ill of Thomas, even if it's his wife, my mother-in-law will thoroughly scold them. That's just how she operates. I'm not lying. If it concerns you, I'll show you video recordings of what's been going on inside the house for a month. I, inflamed from being made out to be the villain despite suffering because of Thomas, conveyed this to my mother-in-law, but she retorted with,
I don't need you to do something so disgraceful. You're the worst daughter-in-law.
And hung up the phone without lending any credence. I had a faint idea this would happen. I don't know what my father-in-law, a man of few words, thinks of me, but my mother-in-law probably sees me merely as a convenient marriage partner for Thomas. Knowing this, I started to feel tired of continuing this married life with Thomas as it is, and hence, I began to enact a plan I had been contemplating for a while. The execution day was the day when the relatives would gather at my in-laws' home. I don't know how it'll go, but I'll do as much as I can. Quietly, in my heart, my fighting spirit was ablaze. On Christmas Day, and as promised, I headed to Thomas's parents' house with him. When leaving the house, I contacted a certain individual. Thomas, oblivious to everything, grumbled,
Ugh, going to my parents is such a drag.
As he sluggishly prepared to leave. Upon arriving at my in-laws' house, Thomas's parents, his uncle and aunt, and their kids were gathered. Moreover, a woman, presumably a housemaid, was preparing food in the kitchen. The housemaid, wearing glasses and a mask, naturally did not engage in our conversation and was steadily working. Since there were so many people, I couldn't keep track of who was who in my mind.
Oh, Sarah, welcome.
My mother-in-law, perhaps having entirely lost faith in me due to the last phone call incident, verbally expressed a welcoming gesture, but her eyes did not smile in the slightest. Forcing a smile, I lifted my stiff cheeks and crafted a smile. Merry Christmas. From then on, there were no direct conversations exchanged with my mother-in-law and meal preparations proceeded. I also stood in the kitchen and prepared various things. My father-in-law, as ever reticent, sat on the sofa reading the newspaper. Once the meal preparations were done and I finished setting the table, everyone began eating on their own. Next to me, Thomas picking up a plate with stew came into view. It was when I also reached for the meal.
You call this food for a family gathering?
With a crash, the ceramic hit the floor, making a dull sound, and everyone's shoulders jerked in surprise. With just one bite of the dish, Thomas flipped the plate over on the table, his angry voice echoing throughout the room. All the relatives gathered looked at him in shock. I've never seen anyone toss food on the floor before. I'm sure they all felt the same way.
Hey, what's your problem? It's your fault for making such terrible food. You're a stay-at-home wife and you serve this on such an occasion? Who'd eat this crap?
Thomas snickered. I looked at him with pity and retorted. I didn't make it, you know? What? Thomas's dumbfounded voice filled the room. Now's my chance. The perfect opportunity. I'm not gonna miss the chance to stand up to him after all he's put me through. I took a deep breath and composed myself. What are you talking about? You were in the kitchen preparing the meal just now, weren't you? Thomas scoffs through his nose, looking at me with a face that says he doesn't understand what I'm talking about. Sure, I was. But the housekeeper was there too, right? I was just setting the table. The housekeeper made the meal. Right? I directed my gaze toward the housekeeper, who should have been resting in the back room. The relatives all gasp upon seeing the housekeeper, who had somehow appeared from within. Yes, that's correct.
See? By the way, this housekeeper is someone I hired. Let me introduce her. It's my mother.
The housekeeper, no, my mother removed the glasses and mask she had been wearing. Seeing her face, Thomas and my parents-in-law gasped in surprise. My parents-in-law and Thomas, of course, know my mother's face, so they must be shocked to see her here.
Weren't you the housekeeper Thomas hired?
I didn't know. There's no way I'd arrange that. It seems that my mother-in-law thought Thomas had called the housekeeper, and she's shivering. Thomas, you know about my mother's work, right? She works at a restaurant, making delicious meals every day. But today, she made it lightly flavored for us. I wonder why you thought I made the meal.
That's because you were in the kitchen until just now, weren't you?
Thomas, perhaps irritated by my question, raises his voice in anger. Indeed, it might be natural to think that I, who had been standing in the kitchen, made the meal with my mother, if viewed objectively. But Thomas, who hardly ever eats my cooking, doesn't know. The dishes I make are not lightly flavored like the meal my mother made for us today. They often have a strong taste. I prefer richer flavors, so I tend to use plenty of salt and spice. But that's true too. However, the main reason is that you've hardly ever eaten my cooking. That's...
What do you mean?
Everyone present, except for Thomas, widens their eyes, not understanding the situation. Thomas, his face turning pale, freezes on the spot. I've decided to spill all his insincerities here and now.
Thomas declared on the day we registered our marriage that he wouldn't come home on weekdays. That we would only spend weekends together. It's what's known as a weekend marriage. He never mentioned such a thing before we got married. I was shocked. I couldn't agree to it, but even if I opposed or tried to discuss it, he was adamant, saying you, a full-time housewife, don't defy me, and he wouldn't listen to my opinions at all.
As the truth about our marital life is revealed one after another, Thomas's relatives look shocked. Among them, my mother-in-law, in particular, barks with a face that says,
"Not that lie again! There's no way! You're still saying that? I've always received reports from Thomas that he and Sarah are living happily together. Please don't say such embarrassing things in front of the relatives."
Seeing my mother-in-law, who defends her son to the end and shows a demon-like expression on behalf of Thomas, I sighed. It's about time. It might be the time to tell that. It was when I, alone, made a decision and clenched my fists tightly.
"Thomas? Are you there?"
An unknown female voice comes from the entrance, causing all Thomas's relatives to shudder. As one of his relatives asks, "What's up?" Simultaneously, the living room door opens, and a woman peeks her head inside. Wearing a short skirt, with bright red nails, and shiny hair, she appears to be in her early 20s. After scanning the many people in the living room, she opens her eyes wide and lets out a dumbfounded,
"Huh? Thomas? What's going on here?"
The woman, who calls Thomas with a sultry voice, looks around multiple times, bewildered. Everyone but me couldn't understand the situation.
"Mary! Why are you here?"
Thomas's mistress, Mary, cocked her head in an increasingly confused manner at his shock.
"Why? Didn't you invite me? You said you wanted to introduce me to your family, so asked me to come."
Huh? When did I ever say that?
2 weeks ago.
When the woman shows the screen of her message exchange with Thomas, he gasped.
"I never sent this."
What? Then who did? With the two quarreling vehemently before me, I took a step forward. "Nice to meet you, I'm Thomas's wife. I'm the one who invited you here today." I apologized to Thomas, but I took the liberty of sending the message. Huh? Both simultaneously dropped their jaws. Yes. In fact, since the day I received the Christmas invitation call from my mother-in-law, I had been aiming for the moment to strike back at Thomas. And 2 weeks ago, while Thomas sneaked into the bath after coming home late at night, I quietly slipped out of the bedroom and grabbed his smartphone. It seemed that Thomas and Mary were communicating frequently, so I quickly understood she was the mistress. I lied and called her to this place today in order to catch Thomas and Mary in the act. Thomas's relatives who heard our exchange began to murmur. My parents-in-law's faces were turning pale. I suspected something was wrong. Why did Thomas start a lifestyle where he only came home on weekends immediately after marrying me? A weekend marriage. We barely see each other even though we're married. What's the point in it? If he really loved me, I thought he wouldn't choose this life.
"So, that's because I'm busy with work. I've told you many times, haven't I?"
Thomas, still trying to resist at this point. Exasperated, I let out a long sigh. Work?
Yes, I believed that story at first too. But the scent of perfume from you when you came home at night. I had my suspicions and hired a detective. Huh? Wait, detective, what the hell?
Thomas trembled abruptly. I took out the infidelity investigation report from the detective agency I had in my bag and shoved it in front of Thomas and the woman. Suspecting Thomas's infidelity, I had requested an investigation from the detective agency a while ago. Evidence of infidelity was found quite quickly, and thus I was able to obtain a large amount of proof. Your relationship began 5 years ago. At that time, Mary was only 15. You picked her up downtown and started dating. But of course, you couldn't marry a child like Mary. Also, Mary is working as a bottle girl now. So you doubt your parents would approve. But, feeling the pressure from your parents to get married soon, you settled for a safe choice like me. After the marriage stopped the nagging from your parents, you continued to see Mary calmly. Eventually planning to divorce me due to busy work and then marry Mary. That's the gist of it, isn't it? I connected the information obtained from the detective agency report and the content understood through messages between Thomas and Mary, exposing their deceit.
What are you saying? Thomas would never.
My mother-in-law, trying to take Thomas's side, couldn't vehemently argue anymore before the presented evidence, sagging her shoulders in defeat. Thomas and Mary, shaking, looked at each other in fear. Eventually, Thomas spoke.
Hey, that's low. You use this tactic to degrade us. What you're doing is filthy.
At those words, I felt an anger so intense my veins felt like they'd burst and I screamed.
Low? What are you talking about? The low one here is you who didn't come home right after we got married, isn't it? You got close to me while having someone else used me and put yourself on a pedestal blaming me? You were waiting for me to get fed up and conveniently bring up divorce myself, weren't you? But too bad for you. Of course, we're getting a divorce. And we took an equal share of marriage expenses, right? Pay back it to me.
I looked between Thomas and the woman, glaring at them with the scariest face I'd ever made.
Please. Forgive me. I was wrong. So overlook the repayment.
I glared again at the two begging for permission and shouted.
Just get out, now.
Thomas and the woman, upon hearing my scream, finally fled the house with shrieks.
My apologies to everyone for causing a scene.
I composed myself and stepped back, sighs leaking from among Thomas's relatives. Everyone was likely at a loss for words, appalled at Thomas's actions.
Sarah. I don't know what to say.
My mother-in-law, who had believed Thomas and had spoken ill of me, lowered her head awkwardly. My mother and I, having pretended to be maids, left my in-laws' home behind. Probably, I will not visit this house in the future. Thus, my one-year marriage, troubled by Thomas, came to an end. A few days later, I filed the divorce paper. Now, I am officially back to being single. Despite gaining a divorced label, the marriage period was short and the living situation was hardly what one could call a married life, so not much really changed. Since Thomas and I had been living in a rental apartment, I was able to smoothly kick him out. After that, Thomas did pay the repayment I demanded, but having no ready money, he seemed to have asked his relatives to lend him some. Even though he should have been working for an elite company, he was broke because he had been lavishly gifting the woman with designer bags and clothes. But Thomas's relatives, having witnessed the Christmas disturbance, of course, had no intention of lending Thomas any money. He apparently took a loan from a bank reluctantly. As the two of them were broke, their marriage was inevitably postponed. At the very least, until Thomas repays the debt he's carrying, they shouldn't get married. That's what the parents of both folks seem to be saying in unison. It's likely that my parents-in-law are just fed up with being dragged into troublesome matters. Let him struggle to pay back his debts all he wants. Compared to the year of suffering I endured, just earning money to pay back is easy, or so I thought, as though it was someone else's problem. On the other hand, I've rejoined the condominium management company I used to work for, and am now enjoying my job. It's way better for my mental health than being cooped up at home. If I ever get married again, I silently vowed to myself that it would be with someone who's okay with both of us working.
My son has passed away too, so you're gonna head back to your parents, right? We'll take over this house.
My dear husband, Tom, passed away unexpectedly. Right after the funeral, as I was drowning in sorrow, Tom's parents, my in-laws, came to visit. Though there weren't many, this house is filled with memories I shared with Tom. Why on earth do I have to leave? Without giving me a moment to dry my eyes, my mother-in-law coldly made the statement. My name is Katie. I work as a secretary at a real estate agency. My encounter with Tom was through the real estate agency where I worked. He was the elder brother of my male coworker, Joe. The two brothers were very close, and since their workplaces were nearby, Tom often dropped by. Since Joe and I worked together in the same position, we became friends. Through him, I was introduced to Tom. Gradually, I started joining the brothers for lunch, and our time together increased. I always thought of Tom as a nice, cheerful guy, but never really saw him as more than a friend. I assumed he felt the same until one day, something happened that changed our relationship. We had made plans to meet at a restaurant Joe had booked, but he had an emergency and couldn't make it. However, we thought it would be a waste to cancel the reservation. So, that was the first time Tom and I were alone together. I later found out that the brothers had planned this, with Joe wanting to set us up. The restaurant had great food, and we got lost in conversation, discussing our backgrounds, values, and more. We quickly became close. The more I got to know Tom, the more I was drawn to his warm smile. From that day, our relationship took a new turn. It didn't take long for us to decide to get married. If it wasn't for Joe's effort, this might not have happened. In that sense, I can't thank him enough. And then, the day came when I met Tom's parents. I was nervous, but they welcomed me warmly. Their thoughtful conversation put me at ease. We're so happy you could come. We've been looking forward to meeting you, Katie. I've prepared lots of dishes hoping today would be special, said my mother-in-law as she looked after me. Tom's parents, like him, were very independent and easy to get along with. I was grateful for the wonderful time I had at my in-laws. Throughout our interactions, they always supported our happiness without pressuring us about marriage or kids. There was talk of living together at Tom's parents' place, but Tom and I had plans to build our dream house. Actually, my grandpa left me a house, I explained. Tom's parents listened intently and nodded. Being the only granddaughter, my grandpa adored me. He had even renovated the house for me before leaving it as an inheritance. He passed away right after settling the inheritance. The property was in a prime location, which had recently been redeveloped, causing property values to soar. But given my experience in real estate, I knew that it might be more beneficial to sell it to fund our dream home project. Although I'm grateful for my grandpa's love, he did tell me that I could either live in or sell the house, so we were considering selling. After getting married, Tom and I moved there. However, it was far from our workplace, and regardless of the great location, it was hard to continue living there. As we proceeded with the selling plans, a significant change came into our lives. Tom, who worked in sales, was transferred. He worked for a major company with branches all over the country. Even though we were newlyweds, they said he was the only suitable candidate, and since it was an official order, he couldn't refuse. I'll definitely be coming home during the holidays. Plus, my parents are coming over to visit. It's okay if you don't want to, but could you perhaps show them around? Your dad and mom are lovely people, so going out with them won't be an issue. But, letting go of our home might take some time. Due to my work, it's decided that Tom would be relocating alone for work. It was all so sudden, but all I could do was suppress my loneliness and worry, waiting for the day we could live together again. True to what Tom had said, during the holidays, especially my mother-in-law would frequently visit. She told me that back in the day when her husband, my father-in-law, used to travel frequently, she had to bear the loneliness multiple times while taking care of young kids. You can create family memories even without kids. Why don't we go out? Maybe shopping will brighten up your mood. Let's go, Katie. Thanks to my mother-in-law, I never felt alone, and in fact, my holidays became busier. But over time, I started to notice some concerns. On my days off from work, my mother-in-law would almost always invite me out. I appreciated it, but by the end of the month, her invitations became rather forceful, paying no mind to my fatigue or household chores. When I'd say, I'd like to rest this week, she'd frown as if I'd said something unreasonable. But isn't it fun to go out together? Or are you saying you don't like hanging out with me? No, it's not that. But you've been taking me out every week, don't you need a break too? She looked sad. No matter how much I tried to clear up the misunderstanding, she wouldn't listen. But as soon as I gave in, she'd flash a bright smile, acting as if she'd forgotten how persistently she'd clung to me. My doubts about her behavior grew over time. The places she dragged me to often involved high expenditures. Constant shopping at brand stores and expensive meals, and she'd set it up so I'd have to cover the bill. She would often leave the store early, and I'd be left with no choice but to pay. She'd neither thank me for the payments nor reimburse me later. Sure, we own our home and my salary is decent, so savings aren't a concern. But Tom and I have always been frugal, so her extravagant behavior felt out of place. Sometimes both in-laws were present, and in those cases, it was even worse. My father-in-law, Joe, would join in, and my financial burden would only increase. I knew I had to address this, but couldn't confide in Tom. He had promised, I'll definitely be coming home during the holidays, but his new work location was extremely busy, and he couldn't come home often. I heard from Mom that you guys go out every week. Is everything okay? You don't seem worried. When I video called Tom, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes and his slightly thinner cheeks. The fatigue from work was evident. I felt guilty bringing up the issue with his mother, so I tried to reassure him. Your mom's been treating me really well. But you need to take care of yourself, okay? I'm fine, so don't worry. I kept reassuring Tom while I continued to bear the cost of outings with the in-laws. However, their behavior escalated, and when I asserted that I couldn't go out one day, they dropped this on me. Hey, could you perhaps lend me some money? Huh? You want me to pay? Just a little bit, really. I've already booked a restaurant. I'll just take another friend, so could you cover the cost I don't have on hand? I didn't want to, but refusing would complicate things. I resignedly opened my wallet. But she never behaved this way in front of Tom. I subtly asked her, have you talked to Tom about this, and was surprised when she responded, it'd be embarrassing to ask Tom. It seemed she felt it was more appropriate to ask Tom's wife, me, for money. I had long given up on my mother-in-law, and it became a daily occurrence for her to ask for money. At least when I gave her money, which she called an allowance, she would stop forcing me out of the house. I knew the situation had gotten out of hand. But I was exhausted from not being able to communicate with my mother-in-law. Her actions became increasingly bizarre and inexplicable. Without prior notice, she would just show up, and it felt like an invasion of privacy when she would look around the house, inside and out. Is this something your grandfather left behind? These furnishings. They're fantastic, to have such luxurious items. Some of the furniture were antiques that my grandfather cherished. My mother-in-law seemed to adore them, coming over uninvited and gazing at them dreamily, as if they were her own. This is mine and Tom's home. I started to consider confronting her about her behavior. Tom might be surprised, but how wonderful it would be if we could figure out how to deal with her together. Her actions were certainly not pleasant. Even if she's family by marriage, it's an invasion of privacy. However, around the same time, Tom's period of work assignment was decided. He'll be back in a short while, and once he's around, my in-laws will probably stop asking for money. A glimmer of hope sprouted in my heart. Tom works hard every day, so I just need to be patient a little longer. I was eagerly awaiting my reunion with him, but then the unexpected happened.
What? Tom collapsed. He's in the hospital?
I felt numb. The call came from one of his coworkers at the assignment, and I rushed to the hospital. Perhaps due to his busy schedule, he suddenly had a heart attack. Tom was taken in an ambulance, but it was too late. My loving husband, who was always the picture of health, passed away suddenly from an unforeseen attack. I had to arrange his funeral in a daze. The overwhelming grief meant I didn't remember much. Joe, my brother-in-law, was there, taking care of most things.
I'm sorry. Even though you've just lost your brother, you're helping out so much.
It's my brother's funeral, of course I'd help. More importantly, are you okay with the property? Is the house all set? Towards the end of the funeral, while we were tidying up, I chatted with Joe. I nodded and responded, everything's in order. A few days after Tom's funeral, both of my in-laws visited. However, it was clear they weren't there to console me. It's a pity about our son, but we're here for you, so don't you worry. For some reason, my mother-in-law had a smug grin on her face. To my astonishment, she had arranged for a moving truck, packed full with furniture and items from their home. I was so shocked and confused that I couldn't speak. This certainly looked like a move. Looks like my mother-in-law and her family are trying to move in without discussing it with me. What made them do this? But the answer is obvious.
Could it be they're after our property?
Even in my confusion, I voiced the concern that had been nagging me. My mother-in-law flashed a cold, smug smile.
The property value's gone up quite a bit. I've always had my eyes on this house. Or should I say, the only reason you could marry my son was because of this inheritance? I allowed the marriage because you inherited it.
I felt a surge of despair and was at a loss for words.
So, you're saying you and your family are gonna live here with me? What? What are you talking about?
I asked in confusion, and she raised an eyebrow. Although Tom's death was unexpected, truth be told, my mother-in-law had always planned to get this house. It seems they intend to oust me and take over the property. And they assumed I'd willingly leave the place. Now that my son's gone, you're gonna go back to your parents' home, right? This house will be empty, and that's just sad. So, we're moving in. No need to worry. Her grin distorted wickedly. Overcome with a mix of fear and frustration, I corrected her.
The house is already sold though.
I tried to suppress a smirk at her misunderstanding, but a hint of amusement showed. In response, my mother-in-law was stunned. Just then, another moving truck, from a different company, pulled up. Excuse me, we're here to move stuff into this house. Perhaps seeing another company's truck made the burly worker approach us for confirmation. The movers my mother-in-law had arranged also stepped out. Realizing that they couldn't start their job with another truck present, they looked perplexed. They sought an explanation from the mother-in-law and father-in-law, but the couple was flustered and clueless. Arguing with everyone wouldn't help. Seeing the chaotic state of my in-laws, I finally regained my composure. I gave clear instructions to move the truck.
This house is already sold and the contract is finalized. A new family will be moving in, so we can't have your belongings here, right?
As the movers were taken aback, a luxury car arrived. Out came a wealthy-looking couple and their children. Turns out, I no longer owned the property. They were the new owners. My in-laws were utterly baffled, unable to comprehend the situation. Please move the truck quickly. The new occupants can't start their work. Once the in-laws' truck was moved, the movers began their work promptly, bringing in brand new furniture. My mother-in-law, unable to accept the reality, persisted in her demands at the doorstep. The new owner tried to shield his family and approached us, leading to another round of chaos.
Who exactly are you? We bought this place. Please have the truck leave.
I hadn't expected my in-laws to show up, so I apologized profusely and managed to calm him down. But my mother-in-law wasn't done. Incredibly, she and her husband barged into the house. Naturally, the interior was nothing like they remembered. Not a single piece of furniture that my husband and I had was left. Witnessing this, my mother-in-law was horrified and began to create a scene.
What the heck? The house is completely empty. All the antique furniture and lights. They were my favorites. Hey, what's going on here?
Katie was outraged, unable to grasp what was happening. When the new occupants threatened, "I'm gonna call the police," her jittery father-in-law quickly fled, pulling his wife along with him. Once they distanced themselves a bit from the scene, the heated mother-in-law cooled down a bit and quieted. For now, I apologized to the new occupants first. Given a warning that there might be more issues in the future, I was allowed to go after noting down the names and addresses of my in-laws. I was drained but still had to explain things to my in-laws. Returning to them, I calmly informed that we had already moved out a few days before Tom's passing. This house was originally planned to be sold with the land, just as initially planned. We had to hold off once due to Tom's work assignment, but the smooth progress had a certain backdrop. The person who supported our decision was Joe. I was perplexed by the change in my in-laws who started asking for money, but I didn't want to worry Tom, so I kept it to myself and had been sulking. Joe, who realized this, came to my rescue. He apparently had a rough relationship with our family-in-law and promised to help whenever I was in trouble. I didn't want to strain my relationship with my husband or my in-laws, so I trusted Joe, who promised to keep it a secret, and decided to consult him about everything. Upon hearing my story, he was furious at his parents. Being Tom's younger brother and also a colleague at my workplace, he understood their scheming very well. And for Joe, his brother Tom was the only family he had. He considered me, Tom's wife, as family as well. Heck, I think our parents either planned to live in that house or cleverly kick the two of us out and claim it for themselves, he said. According to Joe, both of our in-laws have a lavish lifestyle and are pretentious, resorting to any means necessary. Especially the mother-in-law, who acts like a lovely lady on the surface but in reality, only thinks about her own convenience, being quite wicked. The stories Joe, their own son, tells about them are quite shocking. Tom probably never got to see this side of them since he's the eldest and they'd act differently in front of him. Anyway, Joe suggested selling the land as soon as possible to ensure it's not taken away by our in-laws. I agreed with Joe's opinion and decided to proceed with the sale. No matter how precious the property inherited from my grandfather, I didn't want it to become a hindrance to our marriage. Rather, precisely because it's precious, I didn't want any bad blood tied to it. Of course, it wasn't a decision made arbitrarily. Tom and I discussed it and I got his consent. At that time, he got to know about all the actions of his parents. I really didn't want to inform him, but I couldn't handle the sale alone. However, Tom understood my feelings and strongly disapproved of his parents' actions. "I'm sorry I didn't notice earlier. If it's okay with you, let's finalize the sale before my parents make a move. It's a precious house inherited from your grandfather, and I feel guilty." "No, don't worry. If it's gonna cause trouble, I think my grandfather would agree that we should let it go." I decided to sell the land not because of the relationship with my in-laws, but to protect the future with Tom. Regarding the sale, Joe, who is a real estate expert, did his best to find the best buyer. What I needed to do was find a new place to move as soon as possible and act naturally so that the in-laws wouldn't suspect anything. Though the house had been lived in, it was almost brand new, which kept the price reasonable. With that, we quickly found a buyer and everything fell into place. They were the family that had just arrived. Originally, we were supposed to wait for Tom's return in our new house. It's just a shame because Tom was also pleased with the sale. Workers swiftly brought in the furniture. Despite the in-laws being ousted, the moving process steadily moved forward. The in-laws just stood there in shock, but they couldn't stay like that forever. The moving company they had hired approached them, clearly infuriated, demanding an explanation. From the movers' perspective, there was an inexplicable oversight, causing a clash in the moving bookings.
"I can't believe this is happening.
This is a breach of contract. They confronted the in-laws, but they were at a loss for words and couldn't explain properly. In the end, they had to take back all the household items, and it seemed like they were going to be charged a significant additional fee due to this unforeseen situation. My mother-in-law, perhaps finally grasping the situation, clung to me, trembling.
This is the home of my eldest son's wife, our home too, right? This isn't normal, is it?
She desperately tried to make excuses to persuade me, but I ignored her, took only my belongings, and left. The property now belonged to a new family. It wasn't even mine anymore, so there was nothing for me to respond to. The memorial service for my husband went smoothly. Although I did encounter my in-laws, they seemed like they wanted to say something about the house, but they just whispered amongst themselves and left. I didn't feel any obligation to communicate with them anymore, so we barely spoke. I lived my days in peace. In a new home. In the small house where we were supposed to start anew, I faced the grief of losing my husband, Tom. I had a significant amount of savings from the sale, but with Tom gone, my plans to build our dream home vanished. I returned to work and, immersed in the precious memories with Tom, began to focus on healing and moving forward. On the other hand, it seemed that my in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, had been harboring deep resentment. I didn't want to deal with them anymore, so I didn't inform them of my new address. Being unable to interact with me further intensified the dissatisfaction inside my mother-in-law. She was too proud to go to my brother-in-law, Joe, with whom relations had soured, and she didn't know where I lived either. The stress piled on, and eventually, she lost her balance. One fateful night, she attempted a heinous act by spreading gasoline around the sold house. Fortunately, a nearby resident found her suspicious and detained her. The police were alerted, and it was found she had also prepared paper and a lighter. She was arrested on suspicion of attempted arson. The man who almost had his house set on fire was extremely furious when he recognized her as the woman who had stormed in on the moving day. He was adamant about pressing charges, and I was informed. I apologized, but that was for the horrifying experience of almost being a victim of arson. There was nothing I could do about my mother-in-law's actions. In the end, she couldn't avoid being charged. And due to my repeated apologies, I managed to get forgiveness on the condition that such an incident would never happen again. Having grown up spoiled and never experiencing hardship, my mother-in-law had always gotten what she wanted. That's probably why, when she couldn't have that house, her frustration led to a twisted envy. She began to resent both the house and the land, which drove her to crime and eventually landed her in prison. Her husband, who should have been her pillar of support, fought constantly after her arrest and ultimately decided to divorce her. Thus, when she was released from prison, she had no home to return to. But, one could say it was the result of her choices. Joe, having lost his brother, felt lonely but always said, "Having you as my sister-in-law makes it bearable," comforting me. Even though I had cut ties with my in-laws, I hadn't lost all my family. For Tom, who I believe is watching over me from heaven, I decided to live each day peacefully.
Today's my birthday. Hurry back home and get ready to celebrate.
My mother-in-law, Barbara, has a habit of calling at the most inappropriate times, and today is no exception. Unfortunately, today is the funeral of my own mother. Despite having informed her about the funeral in advance, Barbara kept calling repeatedly, making me think it must be something urgent, so I decided to answer. I was in a situation where I couldn't step away, so I answered on speakerphone, and her voice ended up echoing throughout the venue. Hearing this, my father, John, started trembling, and things began to spiral out of control from there. My name is Naomi, and I turned 43 this year. I've been with my husband, Alex, since our student days, and we've been married for 17 years after tying the knot at 26. Alex is usually quite reserved and doesn't talk much, so sometimes I find it hard to know what he's thinking. But I can clearly feel that he cares about me a lot. I can say this because whenever I was harassed by Barbara, Alex always stood by my side. Barbara is a difficult person, and even my parents opposed our marriage because of her. Especially my mother, she repeatedly told me, marriage isn't just about love, it involves the whole family. I'm worried that you might end up suffering in the future. In fact, I have been receiving various forms of harassment from Barbara. In the end, I didn't listen to my mother's advice and married Alex, but there were times when I found it hard to bear Barbara's harassment. Every time I consulted Alex about it, he would speak to Barbara, but then she started mumbling under her breath when no one else was around. When I couldn't take it anymore and consulted my mother about Barbara, she would always reassure me, saying, "It's okay. You have me and Alex, don't you?" And then, the other day, my dear mother passed away. I loved her so much, so when I heard the news of her passing, I was truly shocked. I became unable to do anything for myself, couldn't swallow any food, and couldn't sleep at night. Alex took care of me while handling the household chores, and he even took time off work to handle the funeral arrangements. On the day of my mother's funeral, he took a day off to help my father, Michael, and me. 2 days after her passing, the funeral was held, and we were busy finding a funeral director and deciding who to invite. But even during this time, Barbara kept harassing me. In the midst of searching for a funeral director, she would call relentlessly, saying things like, "I want to go shopping now, can you come with me? I also need to buy rice, so I need a car." She was completely disregarding my situation. I told her I couldn't do it, but she wouldn't listen, so I ended up going shopping with her just once. Of course, Barbara knew about my mother's death. She has experienced the death of her own parents and knows how hard it is, yet she still did this to me, making me dislike her even more. Alex always takes my side, but Barbara seems to be discontent with that as well. After being pointed out by Alex, Barbara called me and said, "Your child has grown up like this, it must be the parents' fault," and then she hung up without listening to anything I had to say. My mother raised me with love, and sometimes with strictness. I am proud of her, and I have never once spoken ill of her or behaved in a way that would disparage her. I know I need to do something about Barbara, but before I could figure it out, the day of my mother's funeral arrived. It was the last day I could see my mother, so I wanted to give her a grand farewell. I did ask Barbara if she was going to attend, but it seems she didn't want to. To be honest, I didn't want her to come either, so it worked out for me. Barbara didn't even send a condolence telegram, let alone give a condolence money. I already knew she was that kind of person, so it didn't really bother me, but it was indeed very Barbara-like. "I'm really sorry. I know she's my mother, but I'm truly embarrassed. She wasn't like this before, but she became selfish after my father passed away," Alex apologized. "Yeah, I'm fine. But I would prefer to keep my distance from her as much as possible," I replied. I've told Alex my feelings many times, but for some reason, Barbara keeps trying to reach out to me. It's a very tiring situation, but Alex, being stuck in the middle, must be having an even harder time. At my mother's funeral, the attendees included me, Alex, my father, my mother's relatives, and Alex's father, James. James seems to not get along well with Barbara, as they are already divorced. However, they both get along well with me and Alex. Barbara has always had a bad attitude, you know. If you ask me why I married her, well, I can only say that it was a spur-of-the-moment decision. He would talk like this every time we met. This time, when I told him over the phone that my mother had passed away, he responded, "I'm sorry for your loss. I've only met your mom a few times, but she was a really wonderful person. Of course, I'll attend the funeral." On the day of the funeral, as the attendees gathered, the service began. I made sure my smartphone wouldn't make any notification sounds during the funeral. But I left the vibration function on just in case something urgent came up and I needed to respond quickly. A while after the funeral started, my phone, which was in my bag, began to vibrate. It only vibrated once, so I didn't worry about it, but then it vibrated several more times. Thinking it might be something urgent, I stood up to check my phone, and there was Barbara's name on the screen. Although I didn't want to, I decided to answer the phone just in case it was something important. "Hello? What's up?"
"What's up? You took forever to answer." How many times do you think I called you? I'm in the middle of my mother's funeral right now. If it's not urgent, can you please call me back later? What? You're giving me attitude now? Do you even remember what day it is today? Today is the day of my mother's funeral. I couldn't think of anything else, so I answered honestly. Today is my birthday. Did you forget? Come back home quickly and prepare for the celebration. I was so surprised by what she said that I accidentally dropped my phone. I picked up the phone and confirmed again, but it was indeed a call from Barbara telling me to celebrate her birthday. So, I'm currently at my mother's funeral. I will definitely prepare for the celebration after it's over, so please wait for me. I was astounded by Barbara's words, and after telling her that, I hung up and returned to the funeral. What happened? Is there some trouble? Alex asked me, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I told him it was nothing. Throughout the meal and cremation, Barbara kept calling me, but I decided to ignore all her calls. It was probably just her telling me to come back quickly, and I could deal with that after the funeral. However, I hadn't thought about celebrating Barbara's birthday at all. After all the mean things she had done to me, expecting me to celebrate her birthday now seemed incredibly audacious. And then, just as the funeral was about to end, something in my bag accidentally pressed against my phone's screen, and I answered Barbara's call, which was, for some reason, on speakerphone. The next moment, despite being in the middle of my mother's funeral, Barbara's voice echoed throughout the venue. When are you coming back? Today is my birthday. Hurry up and come back to prepare for the celebration. Her voice was so loud that everyone turned to look at me. Realizing this was bad, I tried to hang up, but my father, Michael, who was nearby, asked me, "What's going on? Was that Barbara?" I couldn't lie, so I explained everything that had just happened to my father. Then, he clenched his fist until his knuckles turned white and started to tremble. My father is usually a calm person, but when he gets angry, he is terrifyingly scary. Moreover, he has a personality that drives people into a corner until they hit rock bottom, so no one can go against him. However, what he says is always right. And right now, my father is incredibly angry right before my eyes. Give me your phone. Without allowing me to say anything, my father snatched my phone from my hand. Meanwhile, Barbara was still shouting something over the phone, but as soon as she heard his voice, she suddenly became silent. Hello, this is Naomi's father, Michael. May I ask if this is Barbara? Oh, Michael, are you? It's been a while. You were shouting quite loudly just now, but it's your birthday today, isn't it? Happy birthday. By the way, do you know what day it is today? I timidly looked at my father's face as he spoke, and while there was a smile on his face, his eyes were not smiling. This is the expression he has when he is truly angry. I have hardly ever seen my father angry. But there was one time I witnessed him getting angry. It was when a man bumped into my mother on the street for no reason. Instead of apologizing, the man started berating my mother. My father, who walks fast, was a few meters ahead of my mother, but he noticed and came back. Do you need something from my wife? He asked, placing his hand on the man's shoulder. The man turned around, froze, and then ran away. That's true. My dad is about 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighs around 200 pounds. He has a shaved head, so he looks intimidating to anyone who sees him. A man who was acting boldly just a moment ago ran away without saying anything as soon as he saw my dad. Of course, Barbara has met my dad before, so she generally knows what he's like. During the meeting of both families, Barbara was using words to belittle me, so my dad confronted her, saying, "Does that mean you think my daughter is a failure? I don't understand. How could someone like you give birth to a wonderful man like Alex? I can't figure it out no matter how many times I think about it." That made the atmosphere turn sour instantly. While my dad is always a strong ally by my side, it seems he can be a bit too honest at times. We're in the middle of a funeral, right? I know that because you told me earlier. The living are more important than the deceased. Just go and buy some steak or something for the birthday celebration.
Since he was on speakerphone, Barbara's voice was resounding throughout the venue. Everyone was watching nervously to see what my dad would say next, but contrary to expectations, he said, "Understood. The funeral will be over soon, so I'll tell Naomi to head straight there." I was so surprised that he would say something like that, I couldn't help but blurt out, "Wait a minute, Dad, I'm not going, okay?" My dad put his index finger to his lips and silently gestured for me to be quiet. Maybe he has some kind of plan. I don't understand what he's thinking, so first I decide to wait for the phone call to end. But even after the call ended, my dad didn't say anything, and we had to resume the funeral. The continuation of the funeral took place, and it finally ended around 5 p.m. "Hey, Dad, I really don't want to celebrate her birthday." "Don't worry, I have a proper plan. Naomi, you just need to drive. Can we stop by my house before heading to the supermarket?" I'm feeling uneasy not knowing what my dad is thinking. But so far, he has never been wrong. I have absolute trust in him, even though I'm not convinced. So I decide to follow his instructions. Since Alex had taken time off work, he went back to work right after the funeral and didn't come with us to Barbara's house. When we arrived at the supermarket, my dad bought a cake and steaks, and then he returned to the car with a large envelope from the house. "The funeral for Mom just ended, and I'm really sorry to ask this of you. Could we go to Barbara's house next?" Judging from the cake and steak in my dad's hands, it seems he intends to celebrate Barbara's birthday. I've told him I don't want to do this, so why is he trying to accommodate Barbara's request? The uneasiness doesn't clear away, but we've come this far, and there's no turning back now. I grip the steering wheel tightly and drive towards Barbara's house. "Dad, are you really planning to celebrate her birthday?" "Yeah, that's the plan. But at the same time, I intend to give Barbara a piece of my mind," he replied. It seems he has something in mind, after all. When I ask him what he's thinking, he just says, "You'll see when we get there. It'll be clear once we arrive," and doesn't give me a straight answer. So I decide not to ask anything more until we reach Barbara's house. It takes about an hour to drive from the funeral to Barbara's house. When we arrive, my dad takes the cake, steaks, and the large envelope and rings the doorbell. Barbara shows up at the front door right away, surprised to see my dad. "Oh, so you came too, Michael?" "Yes, I heard it's Barbara's birthday." "It's not much, but I brought some food and a gift. May I come in?" Barbara was hesitant at first, seeing my dad eager to enter the house. But as soon as she realized she was getting a feast and a gift, she let us in without any hesitation. "Was it really okay for you to prepare a feast and a gift for me?" Barbara's tone changed completely when she realized we were there to celebrate her birthday, and she started speaking in a sweet voice. I grilled the steaks and arranged them on the dining table along with the cake. Wow, the steaks and the cake look delicious. "Shall we eat?" "Before we eat, please wait a moment." My dad interrupted just as Barbara was about to dig in with her knife and fork. I was curious to know what he was about to say, but Barbara was visibly frustrated, having to wait with a hot steak right in front of her. "What is it? Hurry up, or the steak will get cold. This won't take long. Here's your present," my dad said, handing her the envelope. "What's this?" she asked, looking puzzled. "It's a land title deed," he replied. For a moment, Barbara seemed to not understand what was going on, but upon checking the contents of the envelope, she froze. Barbara lived in a single-family home, but in fact, the land was owned by her father. Her father had inherited several pieces of land over the generations, and he was renting them out to friends and relatives. Barbara was one of those people, and when it was decided that I would marry Alex, it was decided that the land would be rented to her. At that time, James was also living with us, so we decided to build a single-family house, and my father was covering the expenses. Several years later, Barbara divorced James and lived alone in this house, but the owner was still my father. What is this? What does this mean?
No, I thought you might have forgotten, but I just wanted to remind you that I own this land and house. You've been living here out of my goodwill, but I've decided to reconsider everything due to recent events.
According to my father, he had decided to stop renting the house to Barbara. He figured she couldn't leave right away, so he was going to give her 1 week.
1 week? There's no way I can leave in such a short time. And just try to make me leave, I won't go, I guarantee it.
Is that so? Well, I have other plans in mind.
What are you going to do?
Honestly, I had no idea what my father was thinking. I was surprised enough that my usually gentle father was this angry and telling her to leave, but now I was wondering what he would do next. As I thought this, my father started making a call to someone. Judging from the conversation, it seemed like he was talking to a lawyer. It appeared my father was trying to forcibly evict Barbara from the house.
Hey, wait a minute. Are you really trying to kick me out just because of that? It's just a funeral, right? It wasn't a big deal when you guys left halfway through.
Hearing this, my father trembled with rage. I think Alex and James are really good people, but I can't forgive you. I said earlier I'd wait a week, but I want you to leave right now. I will report you for trespassing, he declared sternly. What you've done until now is truly unforgivable. That's why I agree with my father's opinion, I added.
Trespassing? I live here, you know? Don't you get it yet? It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that you've been living off of us.
Barbara tried to argue back, but being someone who always cares about what others think, she might have thought it would be bad to actually get reported. So she left the house with only the bare minimum of her belongings. After that, Barbara went to a friend's house, but she was turned away. She is known for saying unpleasant things to friends and neighbors, so no one probably wanted to take her in. Unable to be accepted by anyone, Barbara reluctantly decided to go to her sister's house. Jessica, who is Barbara's older sister, does have a stronger personality than Barbara, but she has always been incredibly kind to me.
Naomi, I know it's been tough for you as well. I've lived with Barbara since we were little, so I know what she's like. She gets angry when things don't go her way, and she always tries to assert her dominance, doesn't she? If you ever run into any trouble, don't hesitate to tell me, okay?
She was always considerate of my feelings and made an effort to keep in touch, informing me via phone whenever Barbara visited her place and giving me updates on how Barbara was doing. Barbara, despite her complaints about me and our father, would be in trouble if she lost her place to live. It seems like she's desperately trying to mend her relationship with Jessica, though all of their conversations are transparent to us. And then Jessica told me, Naomi, you and your father probably don't want anything to do with Barbara anymore, right? Don't worry about it. We'll take care of everything from here on. We'll let you know if there's any progress. Barbara is a scattered person, so it's impossible she has any savings, and even if she receives a pension, she ends up spending it all. Moreover, since she has no one else to rely on, it seems she eventually ended up living with Jessica. Since Jessica lives on the same property as her sons, even though it's just the two elderly women living together, someone could come to their aid if anything happens. Thinking this would give us peace of mind to finally get Barbara out of the house, we decided to send Barbara's belongings to Jessica's place and put the house up for sale right away. The property is located in a pretty prime location, so it sold quickly, and we were finally able to get Barbara out of the house for good. However, Barbara sometimes calls me. Come pick me up quickly. I hate living with my sister. She makes me do everything, and she's always making snide remarks. If you feel sorry for me, help me out. It sounds like you're going through exactly what I went through with you before. You used to do the same things to me, Barbara. I'm not going through that again, and Alex agrees with me. After saying that, I hung up the phone, and I have since ignored all calls from Barbara. And since then, I've been living happily with Alex. I did propose to my father to live with us, but he declined, saying, I'm still perfectly capable of living on my own. Plus, I've got enough funds set aside for my retirement, so if I can't live by myself anymore, I'll just move into a facility. Although Alex was supportive of my father living with us, we couldn't force him since he was so against the idea. In the end, nothing changed, and I continue to live with just Alex. But there has been one change since then. Alex has started to open up more about his feelings and thoughts. After the whole incident with Barbara, I went through a period of emotional instability. I couldn't cook, and stress-induced insomnia made it hard for me to concentrate. That's when a doctor told me something. "Naomi, you must have been under a lot of stress. I can tell you've been holding a lot in." Right now, Alex's support is crucial, so he needs to make an effort not to worry you. Ever since that day, Alex has been talking to me more. "I feel like eating omelet today. I'll go to the supermarket, so can you make it?" He would make food requests, and sometimes he'd say, "We haven't been going out much lately. How about we go for a drive for a change of scenery?" And he'd take me to a beach a couple of hours away by car. I can really feel that he's making an effort to think about me and what I need. Even though he's not great at expressing his feelings, I truly appreciate his attempts to show his love for me. It's probably all thanks to the incident with Barbara. As terrible as that experience was, ranking among the top 3 worst times of my life, it ultimately helped me move towards a happier life. I like to think that a higher power has been watching over me, rewarding my past deeds with happiness now. Just like before, I want to live a life that I can be proud of, without feeling ashamed in front of anyone.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked. We could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick! What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.